Thank you very much, and I want to thank each of the witnesses for being here on what is a very interesting topic, an important topic, and complex topic. There are very real and complicated issues and countervailing arguments on both sides. I think there is widespread agreement on locking the clock, but where to lock it. The reason we're holding these hearings is because these are real arguments and they have real impacts on people. Let me start on the health side. Dr. Johnson, can you expand on the impact sleep deprivation has on our overall health, on our minds, our moods, and especially on young children for whom we know sleep is so vital?
Thank you for asking about that. Yeah, sleep comes, has different aspects. So one is just how much we sleep, but it's the quality of sleep and then the timing of sleep. So any disturbance in that can affect our, how we do. So we know that kids, even if over a whole week they get enough sleep, if they don't get enough during the week and catch up on the weekend, they still don't do as well. And so sleep and our circadian rhythms, they really regulate every aspect of our body, our metabolism. They affect how we think about things. They affect our choices of food. You're more likely to grab a celery stick when you're, got enough sleep, but grab that bagel or that, candy bar when you're sleep deprived. Athletic performance, we know, is better when people do sleep. Academic success in school. And then mental health has some of the most deep connections to sleep health. And that's why, even though people, feel better when they see light, it's that timing of light and our circadian rhythms that is so deeply intertwined that if we can improve sleep, if we can improve those rhythms, we see those lower rates of depression overall. We see lower rates of suicide. And that's what the data, there was just a new study that came out just last week showing 6% higher rates of depression when the sunrises are set later, when we lose that critical morning light. And this gets exponentially worse in the winter when you lose the light in the morning. So Texas and the southern states actually lose that morning light for a longer period because of the curve of the earth. The more even days, you get 3 to 4 months with it being dark after 8 a.m. And some of the darkest places in the country are actually in western Texas if we were to go to permanent daylight savings time. And that's why in 1974, a lot of the push to end our experiment with daylight savings time was actually pushed by states like Florida and Texas and the southern states.
Can you also explain why consistent sleep patterns are important for teen brain development and mental health?
Yeah, so again, this goes back to our circadian rhythms. And so when our circadian rhythms are working well, they help us anticipate our day. And so what I mean by that is we have certain times when our body wants to go to sleep. And so teenagers, their natural rhythm is later. If any of you have been around a teenager, you can't just say, go to bed. They're like, I'm wide awake. We have this, what we call a forbidden zone. Their alertness just is skyrocketing in that time before bed. And so they can't get to sleep on time, but if our social schedule is set an hour earlier, which is what daylight savings time does, they don't have that opportunity to get the amount of sleep they need, and they tend to switch back and forth on weekends, and that switching affects us. And so that then affects how our brain functions. We know more and more about sleep being important for clearing toxins from our brain, which sets us up for things like dementia, Parkinson's disease. I just came back from the neuro conference with data pointing to the connections there. Our metabolism gets off, so we're more likely to gain weight. Again, even if people do exercise more, we see like 10% higher rates of obesity in places where the sun sets later. So sleep is so critically important for our metabolic health, our overall health, our mental health, how our brain functions, which affects the safety issues. The highway study, it found a higher risk of vehicle crashes even though it was light later. The effect of sleep is more powerful than almost anything else, and by aligning the sun, we can really help that.
So let's talk a little bit about the idea of states' rights. And I've heard from groups on both sides of this issue that want either permanent standard time or permanent daylight savings time. Almost everyone agrees that changing the clock twice a year doesn't make sense. Mr. Yates, in your opening statement, you said that setting the clock is fundamentally a states' rights issue. Why do you think that decision should be left to the states?
Thank you for the question, Senator. The main reason is geography, right? Like we live on this big round ball and the sun is moving, and the difference in where each state is makes a big difference in how the sunrise and sunset time applies. And so to say that there is one solution that is exactly right for Texas and the exact same solution is right for Atlanta, for Georgia, is what I would posit overreach by the federal government. And I might even go back to the example that is often cited about when the time change happened in the 70s. And just to give a little context to why that was such a failure, it's often cited that people didn't like it because there were children that were put at risk in the dark waiting for school. It turns out a lot of that is apocryphal. As we've heard, pedestrians are much safer with more light later in the day. But the thing that is interesting about that time change was, and this shows you how different politics was back in those days, that law was signed into law on December 15th, 1973, right in the middle of Watergate. You could say that maybe it was a distraction from other things that were going on, but it was enacted on December 15th, on a Saturday. It was it took place on January 6th, 1974, about 3 weeks later. So you can imagine the worst Monday of the year already is the one after the holiday break where you have to go back to school and everything. To have an extra hour of sleep robbed away right before that, you can understand why it was so unpopular and why it was repealed 2 months after Nixon resigned office. So it clearly doesn't work for the federal government to come and say, this is a mandate of exactly what we should do for all of the country all at the same time. But it is the place of the Commerce Committee to say, we need a well-regulated time system. And so it makes sense to get rid of the clock changing. And if we give 2 years to the states to be able to say, so that all of these arguments can be hashed out, and they're all valid arguments, but they can be hashed out in the geography of the place where it would actually apply. And they would have time to plan and figure out what is the appropriate time for school to start to take in this evidence from neurologists, and what is the best time for all of the businesses to operate.
So maybe if we had more daylight, the Watergate break-in doesn't happen, and history would be different. Dr. Johnson, you seem to disagree with having states decide on how they should lock the clock. In your judgment, why do you think that would be the wrong approach?
So time is a measure. So Congress has the control over setting measures. I think of my husband, he likes to make a joke. He's 6'6" in the morning and 6'5" in the afternoon. We don't change the length of a foot on his diurnal pattern of his height. Time is supposed to say, how the sun is moving through the sky. And so if we set it to a standard time of the sun being closer to overhead at noon, now that's something we can go by, but states then can decide how they want to set their social schedules. So instead of sort of tricking people into, you all have to get up early no matter what, let's have each state decide when they want their schools to start, when businesses want to start. But let's fix a measure of time that has a meaning where the sun is overhead, and then adjust, the social schedule around it. And that is definitely something the states should decide on.